This program is presented by the Associated General Contractors of America.
Jeez. Not only do I have to pay attention to what I'm doing, I have to watch out for what everyone else is doing.
Hey, sorry, pal. You're just lucky it didn't hit you.
No, Brad, I wasn't lucky. I was just aware of what was going on, which is what you should have been doing.
I'm sorry. It was just an accident.
Now, you don't know what you're talking about. There are no accidents. They're just screw-ups because you don't plan, or you're not careful, or you're just not paying attention. I learned a long time ago that when it comes to staying out of trouble, nobody else is going to do it for me. I learned the hard way when I passed out from breathing some bad fumes and fell off a platform. So now I make sure I know about the hazards on the job and how to handle them. Well, that's what I'm here to talk with you about. It all boils down to each of us looking out for number one. That way, we'll be able to keep on doing our jobs and collecting our paychecks instead of sitting on the sidelines missing the action. We're all part of a team, and when we screw up, we cause problems for everyone. Now, maybe you're like I used to be. I'd say, I don't have time for all that, or it's too hot to wear these goggles and this hard hat. Well, you don't see football players going onto a field without helmets and shoulder pads. And we shouldn't be leaving ourselves wide open for injury any more than they do. Now, most of the materials we use aren't that dangerous, but we have to handle them correctly to keep ourselves from getting hurt or sick. That's what this program is all about. To help you become more aware of the hazards you face on the job, and to show you how to handle them to keep them from harming you. The first thing to be aware of is that the construction business has some unique hazards that we've got to watch out for. Working construction isn't like working in a factory where everything is pretty much the same from day to day, and hazards can be more easily controlled. In our business, we're always working with changing conditions. Every job site has a different setup and different problems. Weather changes, locations change too. Sometimes we're indoors, sometimes we're out. And even the people come and go, depending on which stage we're at and depending on which trades are on the job. What I'm trying to say is that you have to learn the special hazards of each job site, and if you don't already know them, you have to learn the hazards of your own trade. Now, as if that isn't enough, you also have to know the hazards of the trades working next to you. For everybody's sake. And it helps get the job done with a minimum of hassles. But basically, it's all part of looking out for number one. Now, this business of safety on the job really takes all of us working together. A new hazard communication system has been set up to help make sure that we are able to work safely with the products we use every day. This system lays out everybody's responsibilities, including the companies who make the products we work with, the contractors who buy the products and hire the workers, and people like us who use the products. First, let me tell you about the responsibilities of those who make the products. Now, under this new system, either the maker or the supplier has to be sure that every product is labeled correctly with warnings and certain safety information. More complete information must be available on a form called the Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS, and that sheet must be given to the contractors. You'll be hearing more about what's on the MSDS later. Each product may also have a product sheet, which describes safety measures. Then the contractor has to keep a list of all the possibly hazardous materials that are used, and to collect MSDSs for every one of them. These forms are kept on file for when you need to see them. The contractor has another responsibility, to train us, the crews that will be using these materials. They have to teach us how to get the information we need from the labeling, from the MSDSs, and from the product sheets. Our employers have to inform us about the hazards of specific products and show us how to manage these hazards. And then we need to be told what to do if an accident happens or who to contact. But what about our own responsibility to keep us safe from hazards? Now, you might think you know all the dangers of your job already, but a lot of hazards aren't that easy to spot, and you can't see some of them at all. If we learn about hazardous materials and how they can hurt us, we'll be able to control or manage the problem better. When we start talking about hazards, we have to answer the question, what is a hazard? We use the word factor to help you remember what to watch out for. Factor stands for the 4 major classes of hazardous materials. Factor stands for flammable and corrosive, toxic, or reactive. An example of a flammable substance is paint solvent. We know it burns. Corrosives include the products used to strip or clean floors, the ones that can also damage your eyes or eat away at your skin. Toxic substances can poison you if you breathe them, absorb them through your skin, or accidentally swallow them. Carbon monoxide gas can be toxic, and so can the vapors from solvent-based paints. And you can't even see them. Reactives are things that can change violently when mixed with other materials, but in construction we don't have many of these. So if you know these 4 classes and what materials you use fit which hazard, you're on your way to knowing how to protect yourself. Now, to protect yourself, you need to know the problem you're trying to manage. The 4 classes of hazards in the factor system can create 2 types of problems. They can cause physical or health problems. Physical damage can happen immediately if materials burn, explode, or react. Flammables or reactives, for example, can start burning or explode if they are mixed with the wrong material or are stored in the wrong place at too high a temperature. Health hazards are a little harder to understand. Health hazards can cause damage to your internal organs, eyes, hearing, or skin. These problems are primarily caused by toxic and corrosive materials. These materials have several ways of getting into the body. They can be inhaled as we breathe, accidentally swallowed, or absorbed through the skin. If a chemical can't get in or on your body, it's less likely to hurt you. There's another thing about health hazards you have to consider. They can affect you right away, or it can take years. Health experts use the word acute when they talk about something that affects you right away, like an acid burn or getting dizzy from a cleaning solvent. But some of the problems may occur over a longer period of time. These are called chronic reactions. Now, one example that we've all heard a lot about is asbestos. People can be exposed to it for years with no visible effects. Then, after 20 or 30 years, it turns out that large numbers of people who worked with asbestos came down with lung disease. Well, this is how I think of the difference between acute and chronic. It's kind of like the difference between being taken down by a defensive back and being flattened by the whole front defensive line. And the front defensive line can nail you right away. That's the acute reaction. The defensive back might have a harder time getting you down, but he can still knock you on your butt if you don't see him coming. Or he can wear you down if he's able to get at you enough times during the course of a game. That's a chronic reaction. Maybe the biggest danger of chronic reactions is that since they may not show their effects for years, you may not take them seriously enough right now. But how do we know when we face a health problem? It really depends on how much we get in or on us, and how fast. The government helps us figure out how to manage hazardous substances by determining the safe dose for every product. To get at what a safe dose means, that's sort of like the recommended dose a doctor might prescribe, say 2 tablets every 4 hours. The experts use a safe dose to set limits for each product. Now, this limit is based on what a normal person can safely be exposed to for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, without long-term health effects. But we need to remember that some people are sensitive to certain materials and could have a reaction at a lower level. These limits are known as TLV or PEL. TLV is short for threshold limit value, and PEL is short for permissible exposure limit. Now, don't let all the loose letters and big words confuse the issue. Put simply, to limit the dose you are getting, you have to cut down on how much of the material you're exposed to, or you have to change how long or how often you work with the material. It's like being aware when you're using a solvent how much of the solvent vapor is mixed in the air around you. Too much can make you sick, so you lower the concentration by increasing the ventilation. Another way to limit how much of a vapor you're exposed to is by using respirators. Now, later on, I'll go over the situations where you'll need respirators. But before we go into that, start by recognizing that there are lots of different kinds of respirators. Certain hazards require certain respirators. Some of them look the same, but wearing the wrong respirator for a job can be as bad as not wearing a respirator at all. The MSDS comes in handy here too, because it tells you when a respirator may be needed, and it tells you which type to wear when you're using the product. Using the right respirator is part of the work you have to do to keep yourself healthy. So what's the rest of your part in the system? The foreman or contractor does a lot, but he can't do everything and he can't be everywhere. He makes sure you have the right equipment, he can make sure you have the right ventilation for the job, but don't wait for him to take care of you. If you feel sick from poor ventilation, speak up or do something about it yourself. We also need to read the labels of the products we work with. They're all slightly different, but they give the same basic types of information. And in that small space, they say a lot that can help save us grief and lost time on the job. You especially need to look for 3 words: caution, warning, and danger. Never ignore any of these 3 words when you see them on a label, but pay a special attention when you see the word danger. That means you'll need to take some kind of protective measure right away. The label should also tell the name of the compound or chemical, the manufacturer's name, warnings, and what to do in case of an emergency. Usually it gives information on how to use the product and how to store it, and it tells what protective equipment you'll need. The labels are kind of like road signs that tell you which way to go and how fast. But for a detailed map, you need to look at the MSDS. Now, if you have further questions about a material you are using, these forms are where you look. Now, on this MSDS form, the first section identifies the materials and gives the manufacturer's name and an emergency telephone number. The next section lists the hazardous ingredients and the TLV and PEL limits I mentioned earlier. The following section describes the physical properties, what the product smells like, looks like, things like that. This section gives the fire and explosive hazard data. One of the first things to look for in this section is the flash point. This tells the highest temperature that can be reached before the product may ignite or explode. Now, if they say don't store above 80 degrees, and the place where you're working reaches that temperature, you could get more of a bang out of your work than you bargained for. Now, the next section deals with how chemicals react with each other and what situations to avoid. In this section, you'll find the health hazard information, like how the material gets into the body and how to recognize when someone's having problems. Emergency and first aid procedures are also covered here. The next section gives precautions that should be taken in handling and storing. Also, what to do if a spill happens. The final section tells you when you need a respirator and what type to use, as well as when to use eye protection, gloves, and special ventilation. Now, with all of this, the MSDS is the place to look for everything you need to know about a chemical or a compound. Each MSDS may look a little different, but they all have the same basic information. Now, after you've learned what to watch out for, if you find something that could be dangerous, consult your foreman right away so he can check the conditions and decide what action to take. Or, depending on the situation, you might have to take quick action yourself to keep yourself and others around you from harm. It also helps to know where the nearest safety equipment is, like fire extinguishers, and how to use them in a hurry. Now, we talked about the types of materials and the different hazards they can create in the factor system. These hazards can be managed. Flammables can burn, so keep sparks and flames away. Corrosives can damage the eyes, skin, and lungs, so wear protective equipment when necessary. Toxic materials vary in their degree of hazards. Know the hazards, then manage the exposure and use protective equipment. Most of these hazards we've talked about are very manageable if you stay aware of them and take a few precautions. Now, the makers of the products you use and your contractors are doing their part, but we have to follow up. Take these hazards seriously, and remember that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it can't hurt you just as badly as something falling on your head. So, we have to use the right safety equipment, know what the hazards are around us on the site, and follow our employer's rules. Then we have to understand the special hazards of our own trades and of all the others we work next to. And we need to pay attention to safety programs like this. Now, you're not wasting your time following through on the things I've talked about today. Taking that time will just help you make sure that number one gets to stay around a long time. The more care you take, the better chance you'll have of keeping up with the action.